She was born a month too early, weighing barely 4.5 pounds, pulled into the world through an emergency operation while her father was thousands of miles away. The doctors who worked on her that night were not sure she would live until morning. 22 years later, that same fragile baby is one of the most quietly admired young women in Britain. She competes in a demanding sport that her grandfather almost single-handedly built. She studies English at a Scottish university, and she does it all while seeming determined to be the one royal nobody points at. Her name is Lady Louise, and if you have spent any time online lately, you have probably seen her name attached to wild headlines about secret properties and surprise inheritances. We will get to those, and we will be honest about what is real and what is just noise. But the truth of who she is turns out to be far more interesting than the rumors. This is the story of the granddaughter who almost did not make it, and how she became, in the eyes of the people who knew her best, something quietly extraordinary. To understand her, you first have to understand that she was never supposed to be in the spotlight at all. Lady Louise Alice Elizabeth Mary Mountbatten Windsor was born on the 8th of November, 2003, at Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey. Her mother, Sophie, had been rushed there by ambulance after a condition that caused severe and dangerous bleeding for both of them. Louise was delivered by emergency surgery, and the tiny baby was taken straight to a specialist unit in London, while her mother stayed behind to recover. Her father, Prince Edward, could not be there. He was away on an official trip to Mauritius when his daughter fought her first battle in an incubator. It was a frightening, uncertain start, and in a strange way, it shaped everything that followed. This was not a child who arrived to fanfare and crowds. She arrived as a worry, a small life her family held their breath over. The people who loved her learned early to be protective of her. That instinct lasted. When Edward and Sophie married, the late Queen agreed that their children would be styled as the children of an earl rather than as a prince and princess. So although Louise was, in strict technical terms, born a princess, the world simply knew her as Lady Louise. It sounds like a small detail. It was not. It quietly set the entire course of her childhood. No princess title meant no automatic spotlight, no expectation that the cameras would follow her every step. Her parents made a deliberate choice to raise her like an ordinary girl who happened to have an extraordinary grandmother. And here is the detail that tells you how well that choice worked. For years, Louise did not understand that her grandmother was the Queen of England. Her mother revealed this in a television interview years later, and it is one of those facts that sounds made up but is completely true. Little Louise would come home from school puzzled because other children kept telling her that her grandmother ran the country. To Louise, the woman she visited in Scotland and at Christmas was simply grandma, not a monarch, not a head of state, just the kind older woman who liked dogs and the outdoors. She had no idea the rest of the world saw her grandmother completely differently. Think about how rare that is. A child born into the most famous family on earth, and her parents managed to give her enough normality that the crown did not even register. That was the world Louise grew up in. Modest, grounded, slightly out of frame. She went to school like anyone else, first near Windsor and then at a boarding school in Ascot, where she studied English, history, politics, and drama for her final exams. And in the summer of 2022, before heading off to university, she did something that made headlines for all the right reasons. She got a job at a garden center. Not a ceremonial job, a real one. By the accounts that came out at the time, she worked the tills, greeted customers, and spent her days pruning and potting plants. A granddaughter of the Queen, earning her own pocket money among the seed trays and watering cans, with most customers presumably having no idea who was ringing up their compost. It was the kind of summer job half the country has had, and she chose it. Her mother once explained the family's thinking very plainly, telling a newspaper that they raised their children to understand they will very likely have to work for a living. That single sentence explains a great deal. In a family where some members spend their lives surrounded by staff and protocol, Louise was being raised to expect none of it as a right. There is a small story that captures her better than any official photograph. She was once spotted sitting on the floor of a crowded train, working away on her laptop, simply because there were no seats left. No fuss, no demand for special treatment. Just a young woman doing what any of us would do when the carriage is full. That quality, that complete lack of grandness, is exactly what drew her closest to her grandparents. And it is where this story really begins to glow. The royal family does not officially have favorites, but anyone who watched closely understood that the late queen held a particular soft spot for her youngest granddaughter. Royal commentators have pointed to those early days, the fragile birth and the worry it caused, as the start of a special tenderness. Louise had given her grandparents a real fright when she came into the world, and perhaps that never quite left them. She became, in the words of those who follow these things, deeply treasured by both the Queen and Prince Philip. The bond grew strongest in Scotland. At Balmoral, the family's private Highland retreat, the Queen could finally stop being the Queen for a few weeks each summer. And while other relatives would arrive with packed schedules and entourages, Louise would turn up ready to actually be there. Walking boots, a sketchbook, a genuine curiosity about the hills and the animals and the long, quiet days. She was happy to draw, happy to wander, happy to help look after the younger children in the family. The story goes that she would sit patiently with her little cousins, encouraging them to draw the rabbits and deer. The Queen had spent her whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. She could spot it instantly. And in Louise, she saw the opposite, a young person who wanted nothing except to spend the time. That is the kind of thing you cannot fake, and the kind of thing a person in the Queen's position learns to value above almost anything else. But it was Prince Philip who gave Louise the gift that would come to define her. He gave her a passion. Philip loved carriage driving. He more or less rescued the sport in Britain, taking it up seriously after he gave up polo. And he kept at it competitively into his 80s and casually into his 90s. It was his great late-life love. And of all his children and grandchildren, it was Louise who caught the same fire. He taught her himself, from the time she was a girl. She has spoken about it in her own words, in a documentary made about his life, and what she described was achingly ordinary and sweet. She said it was slightly scary to learn from him, because he had practically invented the sport. But it was also incredible to learn firsthand from the man himself. She described how he was so involved in her driving, how he would take her on a different route every single day, somehow never running out of new ones, telling her stories about anything and everything as the ponies went along. After every competition, she said, he would ask how it had gone, and his eyes would light up the moment the subject came up. That is the real inheritance, not a house, not money, a shared joy handed down from an old man to a young girl on quiet roads around a Scottish estate. So when Prince Philip died in April 2021, just short of his 100th birthday, the question of what he would leave Louise was, in a sense, already answered. He left her his two black fell ponies, Balmoral Nevis and Knotla Storm, both born in 2008, one of them bred by the Queen herself. And he left her his carriage. Not just any carriage. The polished, dark green four-wheeled carriage he had designed to his own exact specifications, the one he drove in his final years. If you watched his funeral, you saw that carriage. It stood in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle as his coffin was carried past, his cap and gloves resting on the seat, a small pot of sugar lumps set out for ponies who were not there. It was one of the most human and heartbreaking images of the whole day, and it now belongs to Louise. She did not just keep it as a relic, she drives it. A year after his death at the Royal Windsor Horse Show during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, Louise took her grandfather's carriage out herself as part of a tribute, in the same celebrations that honored the breed of pony Philip had fought to protect. Picture it, a teenage girl driving her late grandfather's carriage in front of her grandmother in his memory. By the accounts of those who were there, It moved the Queen deeply. It was one of the last times the two of them shared that particular kind of moment. The grandmother watching the granddaughter carry the grandfather's legacy forward in front of everyone. And that is the thing about Louise. She did not simply inherit her grandfather's things. She inherited his devotion to them, and she honored it. The people in that world have noticed. Her trainer, who once competed alongside Prince Philip himself, has described Louise as a pleasure to work with and the kind of competitor where you would honestly never guess who she is. She enters events under the family name Mountbatten-Windsor, dressed like everyone else, and asks for no special treatment of any kind. As one person in the sport put it, on the field it does not matter who you are, and Louise wants it exactly that way. She has even started taking on a behind-the-scenes organizing role at the horse show, working as part of the team rather than being waited on as a guest. There is a real young man in her life too, by the way, though here we should be careful and stick to what is actually known. She has been linked for a couple of years to a fellow student she is said to have first bonded with over a shared love of theater, and he has been seen supporting her at her carriage driving competitions, sitting in the crowd with her mother. They appear, by all accounts, to be a young couple quietly getting on with their lives. Nothing more dramatic than that has been confirmed, whatever the internet may tell you. Which brings us to the headlines. If you searched for Lady Louise recently, you very likely ran into bold claims that she has inherited a secret Balmoral cottage, sometimes called Wren's Nest, supposedly handed to her as a surprise wedding gift involving Prince William and her godfather, Lord Ivar Mountbatten. These stories have spread fast across social media, and this is the moment to be straight with you, because honesty is worth more than a dramatic headline. Almost none of that is confirmed. There is no public record of any wedding, for the simple reason that Louise is not married. She is 22 and in her final year of university. The property claims trace back to online speculation, not to any official announcement, and they tend to repeat each other rather than point to any solid source. On top of that, royal wills in Britain are sealed for decades precisely so that the public cannot know exactly who inherited what. So when someone tells you with total confidence what the Queen secretly left to a specific grandchild, the truthful answer is that they cannot actually know that. Neither can we. What we can say honestly is this. The Queen privately owned Balmoral and Sandringham, unlike the palaces that belong to the nation, which means she was genuinely free to leave parts of them to whomever she wished. There is a real history of Balmoral properties being passed down to grandchildren rather than to the older generation. Prince William, for example, was given a home on the Balmoral estate by his great-grandmother before she died. So the idea that the Queen might quietly look after a beloved grandchild is not far-fetched. It is simply not something anyone outside the family can confirm. The cottage story may hold a grain of truth, or it may be invention dressed up as fact. We do not know, and anyone being honest with you will admit that. But here is what is worth noticing. The reason these rumors spread at all is the part that is true. People believe the Queen might have left something special to Louise because of everything we have actually seen. The closeness, the trust, the quiet devotion. The rumors grow in the soil of a real relationship. Her godfather, Lord Ivar Mountbatten, is real, and so is his place in her life. He is a second cousin of King Charles and a genuine family friend, and the bond between his family and Louise's runs deep, woven together through years of godparent ties in both directions. In 2018, he became the first member of the extended royal family to have a same-sex wedding, in a moment that was quietly groundbreaking, with his former wife walking him down the aisle at the suggestion of their own daughters. He is exactly the sort of person who understands what it means to look after a historic home and to pass things carefully to the next generation. If anyone were advising Louise on the weight of family legacy, he would be a natural choice. That much is fair to say. The surprise cottage handover is not. So strip away the noise, and what is left is the real story, and it is the better one. Lady Louise is now in her final year studying English at St. Andrews, the same university where her cousin William met his future wife. In 2024, she joined the university branch of the Army's officer training program, and photographs appeared of her in military kit, a helmet marked simply with the family name. People who watch the royals closely have started to wonder aloud whether she might one day take on official duties, especially with so few working royals left in the younger generation. She has the temperament for it. She has the work ethic. And unlike almost anyone else in her position, she has spent her whole life learning to be ordinary first and royal second. That is what makes her unusual. The Queen, who spent 70 years reading people for a living, seems to have seen something in this quiet, sketchbook-carrying, train floor-sitting granddaughter that the headlines are only now catching up to. Not someone hungry for status, someone who would treasure the peace and the legacy rather than show it off. She inherited her grandfather's ponies and his beloved carriage, and she drives them still. Whatever else she may or may not have been left, that is the inheritance that mattered, because it was never really about the objects. It was about being trusted to carry something forward gently, the way it was meant to be carried. So the next time a headline promises you a secret royal property and a stunning surprise, remember the real picture underneath it. A baby who almost did not survive her first night. A girl who did not know her grandmother was the Queen. A young woman who works the tills, sits on the train floor, and drives her late grandfather's carriage with his cap still fresh in everyone's memory. That is not a story that needs inventing. It is quietly remarkable exactly as it is.